9mm versus 45 ACP and short barrels. And what we have today is our Nosler ASP ammunition, which stands for Assured Stopping Power. So these are Nosler bullets as well as the actual ammo brand. So our 9mm is a 115 grain jacketed hollow point that is rated at 1170 feet per second. Our 45 ACP is a 185 grain that is rated at 980 feet per second. And by the way, these are the right sectional density to each other. Means the scaling up, you know, one's not like heavier for its diameter and all of that. So this is actually a perfect comparison in a way to compare 115 grain 9mm to 185 grain 45 auto. So I'm going to test these through my 3.2 inch barrel Taurus G2C in 9mm and my 3.3 inch barrel Smith & Wesson Shield 45. So this should be a pretty interesting test. I'm going to go through the chronograph to see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So I'm going to go in the plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those are. No fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point or anything like that. And see if we can get some expansion out of those short barrels. Then I'm going to move on to doing more of a real world simulation where I'm going to have 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh, so 3 inches here and 16 inches here really represents more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches here. So if we go to our back rib stimulation, that would be about 9 inches through a real living target. So we'll do our plain clear ballistics shot, then our real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, so first up we have our 9mm. This is a 115 grain jacketed hollow point. It's rated at 1170 feet per second. I don't know the barrel length for that. It's probably a 4-inch barrel. But let's see what we get with this in my 3.2 inch Taurus G2C. .1104, 1107, 1068, 1098, 1097. So yeah, about what you would expect with something like that. Now our 45 ACP, this is rated at 980 feet per second, likely through a 5-inch barrel, and I did test it through my Glock 41 and I got pretty much rated velocity, so I think I got 984 on average. So let's see what we get with a couple inches less barrel. .832, 857, 894, 946, 937. So not particularly consistent. Interesting. Let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, first up, our plain clear ballistics shot. No fabric in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point. No rib simulation that could potentially slow down its penetration. So because the 45's velocity was kind of inconsistent, I did put the chronograph up in front of the gel block. So if we get some weird results, maybe the velocity numbers will tell us why. So let's start with our 9mm plain clear ballistics shot. .1102 feet per second. Now let's set that with our 45 ACP. 856. Let's go take a look. All right, honestly, not bad performance, especially with the 45, with it not going very fast. I would say that everything in there is comparable one to the other than the 45 one a little bit deeper. Our first 3-inch piece here, very similar energy dump. Our 45 energy dump, it goes further along that path there, as we're with the 9mm. You see this where it hits with a huge amount of velocity, then it slows down a little bit quicker, so then the track is a little bit smaller at that point. That's kind of what's going on there with that. And because of the momentum of the 45, it can kind of create more consistent damage, but overall very similar overall. Now our 9mm, we got really good expansion, but we only penetrated to 11.5, which is totally fine because I like to see that. That means we have a higher odds of getting expansion with our real world simulation if we get too much expansion in the plain gel. So that's fine there. Now with our 45, we got right there at 14 inches. I think it's expanded. It's hard to see with the angle where they start bubbling like that, but it looks like it probably did expand. So now let's put on our fabric, put in our rib simulation, and see how this does in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material, followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. I like to keep these bullets within that back rib simulation without it going through that, because that pretty much ensures that it's not going to over penetrate from a front on shot when an average size target. Another thing to note here is I do make my shots at the same elevation, so you know, even though my shots are over about 2.5 inches to the right, sometimes they block the view of the plain clear ballistic shot. The bullets are not going through the exact same channel. I've had enough comments that I have to like mention it now because people keep saying it. But let's see what we get here with our real world simulation with our 9mm. 1,087 feet per second. All right. Now let's hit that with our 45 ACP. 886 feet per second. Pretty consistent velocity there. Let's go take a look. All right, so that's pretty interesting. A little more energy dump in the first 3-inch piece there with the 9mm than the 45. So it looks like fabric really is kind of velocity based when it comes to changing the performance you get in there. So, you know, on a lower velocity round, it seems like it becomes more problematic. But I mean, overall, if we were to actually measure these wound paths here, because they technically measure the whole length of them, there's definitely more damage there with the 45. It did penetrate pretty far, but I would not consider that over penetration because it looks like it hit that back rib simulation and just left a mark. So that's pretty good. And then it rolled back. Usually bullet rollback of that nature means the bullet expanded to 65/100ths of an inch or bigger. You know, I can't tell if that's the case here, but it definitely did roll back. We'll take a look here at our rib simulation on the front. This kind of tells you how much expansion we got, you know, and you know, obviously more percentage of expansion with the 9mm than the 45 because the holes are pretty similar in size, with the 9mm actually being a little bit bigger. So that just means it expands out right away, and that's just based on having a lot of velocity. So that's a good thing that the 9mm has. It has a consistent velocity, which does tend to give you consistent performance, and that is why I actually picked the 115 grain to do with the short barrel test. Because 124 grain, it sometimes gets on the edge of whether it's going to be enough velocity. But if you use a 115 grain through a short barrel, you generally always have enough velocity to get some good expansion. And that's what we got here. So what we got here, we did get some rollback with this as well. We get about 14 3/4 inches with the 9mm, and then it rolled back. Now with our 45 auto, that hit the back rib simulation. So that's right at 19 inches and then roll back. And I can see some expansion. So overall, for what these are, that's not bad performance overall, but even though they have the same sectional density, the 45 still has a little more momentum. And that's one thing that people often misquote. They're like, oh, 45 don't have momentum, it's not going to knock you over. I hear people say stuff like that because they're not understanding what older people are saying with momentum. That's really not where momentum comes into play. Momentum comes into play where it's going to penetrate more consistently and keep going through the target Also, it's going to go through wind a little bit better when you're talking distance shooting and stuff like that. So the 45's higher momentum just makes it a little more consistent as long as the bullet will actually expand. So between both of these, not too bad performance. So let's put these out of the block. We'll take a closer look at these bullets. Then I'm going to shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel. Here is our 9mm, and here is our 45 ACP. So definitely more impressive expansion going on with that 9mm compared to its starting size. But at the end of the day, I mean, they're pretty much making the same size hole. It's just that the 45 is going to have a little bit more penetration there because of that extra bullet mass, but very similar overall with our plain gel shot. Now with our real world simulation, about the same type of thing going on here, just a little bit less expansion overall. Our 9mm and then our 45 over here. I would say the 45 is probably a little bit bigger, even though the percentage of expansion is less. So at the end of the day, you're making about the same size hole. If you get this much velocity here of around 1100 versus 850, you know, you're gonna come to about the same amount of the bullet diameter. It's just that the 45 is gonna do it a little bit more consistently. Like if you had some thing going on where you had to shoot from a distance, basically the momentum of the 45 is gonna keep that velocity very similar at, let's say, 50 yards versus the muzzle. As with the 9mm, you're going to lose quite a bit, and that might make the difference where it might not expand. So up close, very similar performance, but the 45 just has that little extra momentum edge there. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, just my practical shootability drill. So I just want to pull these out from the holster, get a quick front sight picture, pop these off as fast as I think I can realistically hit the target, and see if there's really a big difference between 9mm and 45 auto. So here is our 9mm. All right, not too bad. I had to slow down a little bit because I lost track of the front sight there for a minute. Now with our 45, let's see if there's a big difference here. Alright, so with that I have to take just a little bit more time to acquire my front sight again, but honestly there's something about it where it's, even though it's more difficult, there's more muzzle flip, its timing is a little bit more predictable, if that makes sense. It's like the 9mm has a sharp recoil, it's not very high, but then you just kind of got to judge that based on the sharpness. As with the 45's push, it wants to come back down on target naturally. It does take more time, but it just has a more natural feel to it. So, interesting. Let me back it up from a few more yards, see how these shoot from just a little more distance. All right, 40 yards from the target, so I just want to fire some shots from 40 yards, see how well these things will hit the steel from that distance, see what kind of, you know, energy transfer and all that we might get from that distance, see if there's a big difference in accuracy. I don't have very many of these 9mm rounds left because it was a smaller box than that 45, but I'm just gonna fire slow, see how our 9mm does. I missed that last one, but I missed it. Not too bad overall. They're shooting just a hair low from my point of aim. So 45 ACP. Let's see how this does. So honestly, if I was a bad guy doing bad things, I would rather be hit with that 9mm than this, because it just seems like it hit a lot harder. It really did. and that would be probably something that could be felt, a difference in bullet diameter and weight like that. So interesting test overall. This isn't that bad of ammo, to be honest here. You know, I was thinking I would get terrible results out of the short barrel, but did pretty good for just being a standard pressure round. And it's just, you know, low enough there with the 185 grain standard pressure that it's pretty comfortable to shoot. I would honestly carry that. Even if there were better law enforcement graded rounds, I would probably carry that, just because the shootability and the consistency is pretty good. Now, yeah, there was some big velocity spreads there, most of them being a little bit higher than that average, but overall I think it's just pretty consistent for the way that it shoots and pretty consistent for the way that it performed in the ballistic test. And the 9mm, I would carry that too, honestly. You know, a 115 grain is a great bullet weight for a short barrel pistol. I know that technically like a 147 grain is the most efficient, or 124 grains usually more powerful and all of that. But if you actually, at the end of the day, if you actually look at all the numbers, you're still getting a little bit more velocity with the 115 grain out of a short barrel. And velocity's king. And velocity, in terms of what it does to a 9mm, really can make the difference between getting bullet expansion and getting no expansion. Because I've tested the 124 grain from my snub nose 905. Had some problems with expansion with that. But with this, you know, we're getting over that threshold of whether the velocity is going to work or not. We're getting those upper thousands, and that generally gives you expansion every time. Not the 45, velocity wasn't great, but still got really good performance overall. I would say it's a good round. So enough babbling here. Interesting. I say that a lot, but it is. Had a lot of fun doing this test, and they performed really well. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.